Of all the things my son could have taken from me, he chose my soul. He looked at the workshop my own two hands had built, the place where I'd taught him to hold a hammer, and called it a disgrace. He and that wife of his changed the locks, thinking they could throw me away like a pile of sawdust, but they forgot one thing. I still had the master key, not just to the workshop, but to a secret buried so deep it would bring their whole fancy world crashing down around them. My name is Frank, and for 45 years, my world was a woman named Helen. She was the quiet poetry to my noisy prose, the artist to my craftsman. I knew how to build things that would stand the test of time, but Helen, well, she knew how to make them beautiful. We met young, married younger, and spent every day building a life together. We didn't have much, just a small house, a beat-up truck, and a dream that smelled like fresh-cut pine. That dream was a workshop. Right in our backyard, I built it board by board while Helen was pregnant with our son, Leo. It was our sanctuary. In the evenings, after I'd get home from the construction site, I'd be in there, covered in sawdust, and Helen would bring me a glass of iced tea. She'd sit on a stool, sketching in one of her leather-bound notebooks while I worked. She had a gift, a real one. She could see a piece of furniture in her mind, fully formed, and draw it with such life it felt like you could reach out and touch it. When Leo was born, that workshop became his playroom. His first steps were on a floor sprinkled with wood shavings. I made his first toy, a little wooden car, right on the workbench where he'd later learn to measure and cut. I taught him everything I knew. How to respect the grain of the wood, how to feel the balance of a tool in your hand, how to have patience. Helen taught him about beauty, about the elegance of a clean line and the story a piece of wood could tell. We always thought, that the three of us would build something together. A family business, a legacy. But life has a way of taking left turns when you're looking straight ahead. We lost Helen to cancer just after Leo finished college. The light just went out of our world. The workshop fell silent. For a long time, I couldn't even bring myself to walk in there. The smell of cedar and varnish was too tangled up with the memory of her laughter. Leo, he took it hard to, or so I thought. He seemed adrift, and all I wanted was to give him the purpose we'd all dreamed of. So, I did what any father would do. I gave him everything. He had this idea to start a high-end furniture business. Artisan furnishings, he called it. He'd use Helen's designs, he said, to honor her memory. It sounded like the perfect way to keep her spirit alive. The problem was, starting a business like that, it takes a fortune. Leo didn't have a penny to his name. But I did. Or at least I had assets. I had the small parcel of land up by the lake Helen and I had bought for our retirement cottage. I sold it. Didn't even blink. Then I took out a second mortgage on our house, the one I'd planned to live in until my last day. I poured every last cent into his business, Leo and Company. He and his new wife, Chloe, moved into the main house. It only made sense, they said, for them to be closer to the business. I moved into the small granny flat I built over the garage. It was fine, I didn't need much space. All I needed was my workshop. That was the deal. They got the house, the business, the money. I got to keep my sanctuary. For a while it worked. The business took off. Chloe had a knack for marketing, and honestly, Leo was a decent enough craftsman when he put his mind to it. They were selling pieces for thousands of dollars. Pieces that started as sketches in Helen's old notebooks. I was proud. I truly was. I'd go into the workshop, run my hands over the familiar tools, and feel like Helen's legacy was alive and well. I thought I had secured my son's future and honored my wife's memory. I was a fool. A blind, sentimental old fool. And my education in the ways of the new world, a world of branding and appearances, was about to begin. The first sign of trouble was subtle, like the tiny crack in a piece of wood that you ignore until the whole thing splits apart. Leo and Chloe started talking about rebranding. They wanted to attract a different kind of client, the kind of people who don't just buy a table, they invest in a lifestyle piece. That's how Chloe put it. They started changing things. The logo became sleeker, the website more minimalist. And their attitude toward me, well, that started changing too. I'd be in the workshop, maybe fixing a neighbor's chair or working on a little toy for a friend's grandchild, and Leo would come in, dressed in one of his fancy designer outfits that probably cost more than my truck. He wouldn't be holding a tool, he'd be holding his phone, taking pictures for their Instagram. "Dad, could you maybe tidy up a bit?" he'd ask, his nose wrinkled at the sight of my sawdust-covered workspace. "We're trying to project a certain image. This is a little too rustic." Rustic? My workshop, the place where he learned his craft, was now rustic. It was an inconvenience, an off-brand part of their carefully curated image. I'd just nod and sweep up a bit, telling myself he was just stressed, that the pressure of the business was getting to him. I was making excuses, the way you do for the people you love. The real betrayal, the moment the crack split wide open, came on a Tuesday. I remember the air was crisp, smelled of autumn. I was in the workshop, putting a final coat of oil on a small rocking horse I was making for the children's hospital. The door swung open, and in walked Leo and Chloe, followed by a man in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. "And this is the production space," Leo said, his voice strained. He didn't look at me. The man, who I later learned was a potential investor, looked around my workshop with a detached curiosity, like a scientist examining a strange insect. His eyes scanned my worn tools, the stacks of beautiful cherry and oak I'd been saving for years, the half-finished projects. "This is Frank," Leo said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "He, helps us out. An old family friend." An old family friend. Not his father. Not the man who taught him everything, who funded his entire life. A helper. I felt the blood drain from my face. I just stood there, holding my finishing rag, my hands, the same hands that had changed his diapers and held him when he was sick, suddenly feeling clumsy and foreign. I must have looked like a ghost, because the investor gave me a quick, pitying smile before turning his attention back to Leo. Chloe stepped in, her voice smooth as silk. "We're actually in the process of commissioning a new, state-of-the-art facility. This is just our traditional, inspirational space, where the initial concepts are born." She made it sound like my life's work was some kind of quaint little museum piece. The investor nodded, seemingly satisfied, and they moved on, their voices fading as they walked back toward the main house to talk numbers. I stood there in the sudden silence, the smell of linseed oil thick in the air. The rocking horse seemed to mock me with its innocent, joyful shape. I had been erased. In my own workshop, in front of a stranger, my son had made me disappear. That evening, they came to my little apartment over the garage. They didn't knock. Leo just used his key and walked in, Chloe trailing behind him like a shadow. "Dad, we need to talk," Leo started, avoiding my eyes. He was looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "About what, Leo?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "About how I'm just a helper now?" Chloe sighed, a sound of pure, manufactured exasperation. "Frank, you're being overly sensitive. It was just business. Mr. Abernathy doesn't need to know our entire family history." "So you lie to him instead?" "It's not lying, it's branding," Leo snapped, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold. "And speaking of the brand, that's what we need to discuss. The workshop, it's a problem." My heart, which had been a cold, heavy lump in my chest all afternoon, started to beat a little faster. "What do you mean, a problem?" "It's a disgrace," Chloe said, the words sharp and pointed. "It's cluttered, it's old-fashioned, and frankly, it's an embarrassment. We're trying to build a multi-million-dollar company, and that shack out there is holding us back. My sanctuary. The place I built with my own 2 hands for my wife and my son. We need you to clear it out," Leo said, the words coming quickly now, as if he'd rehearsed them. "We're going to have it torn down. We'll build a proper showroom there, something with glass and steel." I couldn't speak. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. Tear down my workshop? It was unthinkable. It was like asking me to tear down a part of myself. "And what about me?" I finally managed to whisper. "What about my tools? My work?" "We found a very nice retirement community for you," Chloe said, pulling a glossy brochure from her expensive handbag. "It's clean, secure, and they have activities. You could play bingo. It'll be good for you to be around people your own age." I looked from the brochure, with its smiling, silver-haired seniors, to their two young, determined faces. They had planned this all out. My son, the boy whose first splinter I had gently removed, was now trying to remove me from my own life as neatly and painlessly as possible. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it hung in the air with the weight of 40 years of hard work and sacrifice. Leo's face hardened. "Dad, don't make this difficult. This is happening. We need to move the brand forward, and you and your peasant craftsmanship are not part of that vision." Peasant craftsmanship. The skills I had so lovingly passed on to him, now reduced to an insult. "I'm not leaving my home," I said, my voice gaining strength. "And I am not leaving my workshop." "It's not your home anymore." Chloe's voice rose, sharp and shrill. "We live here. We run the business. You are living in the past, and we are trying to build a future. A future I paid for." I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "With the money from the sale of my retirement land. With the mortgage on this very house. A sacrifice you were happy to make." Leo shouted back. "You wanted this for me. Don't you dare throw that in my face now. I wanted to build a legacy with my son, not be thrown into a nursing home by him." The argument raged for another 10 minutes, a storm of bitter words and accusations. But I didn't budge. I would not be moved. Finally, Leo held up his hands in surrender, a cold, calculating look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Fine," he said. "Sit. For now. But things are going to change, Dad. You need to understand that." They left, slamming the door behind them. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling. I thought I had won. I thought I had held my ground. I didn't realize that for them, this was just a temporary setback. The real war had just begun. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little shaky, but resolute. I made my coffee and decided to head down to the workshop early, to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of sanding and sawing. The smell of wood and the feel of a good tool in my hand, that was the only therapy I needed. I walked down the exterior stairs from my apartment and rounded the corner of the garage. I put my key in the lock of the workshop door. It didn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it, thinking maybe it was just stuck. Nothing. My heart started to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked closer. It was a new lock. A shiny, brass deadbolt that wasn't there yesterday. They had changed the lock. I stood there, staring at the door, the key useless in my hand. I walked over to the main house and tried the back door. My key slid in, but again, it wouldn't turn. A new lock here to... They had locked me out. Not just from my workshop, but from the house I had shared with my wife for 30 years, the house that was still, legally, half mine. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I was a prisoner in my own home, confined to a small apartment over a garage, cut off from my life's work, from my memories, from my very identity. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chirping of the birds in the old oak trees sounded distant and mocking. The sun felt cold on my skin. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a coup. They had staged a quiet, bloodless takeover of my life. The hurt was a physical thing, a deep, tearing pain in my chest. It felt like every sacrifice I'd ever made for Leo was being thrown back in my face, not with angry words this time, but with the cold, hard silence of a locked door. I thought of Helen. What would she think if she could see this? Her son, our son, treating his father like an intruder, an inconvenience to be managed and contained. I sank down onto the back steps, the ones I had built with Leo when he was just a teenager. We had laughed that day, covered in sweat and splinters, proud of our work. Now, those same steps felt like a stranger's property. For a few hours I just sat there. The anger hadn't come yet, just a hollow, empty feeling of despair. It was like I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine. My son, the man I had given everything to, had finally succeeded in erasing me. But then, as the morning wore on, something else started to stir beneath the grief. It was a slow burn, a tiny ember of defiance. They thought they could just lock me away? They thought I was just some old man they could pack off to a bingo hall? They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I was the one who built this place. And when you build something, you know all its secrets. You know where all the original plans are. You know, for instance, that there's more than one key to the kingdom. And that's when the anger finally came, cold and clear and sharp as a chisel. And with it, a plan began to form. The first few days were the hardest. I stayed in my little apartment, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Every time I heard their car pull into the driveway, or their laughter drifting up from the patio, it was like a fresh stab in the heart. But the grief was slowly, surely, being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My son and his wife had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated me. They saw a quiet, grieving old man. They'd forgotten I was also a man who had built a business from the ground up, a man who knew how to read a blueprint and spot a weakness in a structure. And their shiny, new life was built on a foundation of lies, and I knew exactly where the cracks were. My mind started working, methodically, like I was planning a complex construction project. Phase 1. Reconnaissance. I needed to understand what I was up against. I started listening. Not at windows, nothing so crude. But I paid attention. I heard the delivery trucks, the expensive wine services, the caterers for the dinner parties they were now hosting. They were spending money like it was water, trying to live up to the wealthy image Chloe was so desperate to project. Phase 2. Gathering my tools. My most important tools weren't in the locked workshop. They were in a dusty old chest in the back of my closet. I pulled it out one evening, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside were Helen's sketchbooks. Dozens of them, filled with her beautiful, intricate furniture designs. Her handwriting was on every page, her signature, the date. These weren't just drawings, they were proof. Proof that the original Leo and Company designs, that were getting rave reviews in fancy magazines weren't Leo's at all. They were Helen's. They were her soul, poured onto paper. I remembered, clear as day, the night Leo had asked to borrow them. To honor Mom, he'd said. To build the business on her legacy. I'd handed them over, my heart swelling with pride. I never thought he would steal that legacy and claim it as his own. The final piece of the puzzle was in an old file box under my bed. I pulled it out and blew the dust off the top. Inside were the original business incorporation documents for Leo and Company. Artisan furnishings. I'd had my old friend Sam, a retired lawyer, draw them up. And I remembered a clause Sam had insisted on, a little detail I'd almost forgotten. The designs from Helen's sketchbooks were not being sold to the company, they were being licensed. The agreement clearly stated that for any design based on her work, Helen was to be credited as the original artist. A small, simple clause meant to protect her memory. A clause Leo had been violating from day one. I had him. It wasn't just a moral failing, it was a legal one. Breach of contract. Intellectual property theft. I sat there on the floor of my small apartment, surrounded by Helen's beautiful drawings and the stark reality of the legal documents. The pain in my chest was still there, but now it had a sharp, clean edge. This wasn't just about a locked workshop anymore. This was about justice. It was about reclaiming my wife's legacy from the son who had tried to steal it. I spent the next week preparing. I bought a high-quality scanner and spent hours carefully digitizing every page of Helen's notebooks. I took photographs of the early prototypes Helen and I had built together in the workshop, pieces that were now sitting in their living room with $1,000 price tags on them. I gathered every piece of evidence, every document, every photograph, and organized them into a digital file with the precision of an engineer. My grief had found a new purpose. It was no longer a weight, but a weapon. And I was finally ready to use it. The turning point, the moment I knew exactly when and how to strike, came in the form of a glossy magazine. Chloe had left it on the patio table, and I'd picked it up one afternoon while they were out. It was a high-end architecture and design magazine, the kind of thing they subscribed to now. And there, on the cover, was my son. The headline read, Leo Martin, the new visionary of artisan design. I felt a cold fury wash over me as I read the article. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It talked about Leo's unique creative process, his innate understanding of form and function. It quoted him talking about late nights in the workshop, wrestling with a design until it was perfect. My workshop. He was talking about my workshop. He even had the gall to say, "My design philosophy is simple, honesty in materials, authenticity in creation. Every piece you see is an original, born from my own two hands and my own vision." My vision. He was taking credit for Helen's soul, for her gift, for the beautiful things she had created out of love. But the final page of the article was what sealed his fate. It announced that the magazine was hosting a lavish launch party to celebrate Leo's cover story. It would be held in their showroom in the city, a gallery-like space I had only seen in pictures. The guest list would be a who's who of the design world: architects, critics, wealthy collectors, and most importantly, the investors they were trying so desperately to impress. The date was set for 2 weeks from now. It was perfect. A public stage, a captive audience, and a self-proclaimed visionary who was about to be exposed as a fraud. This wouldn't be a quiet family argument. This would be a public reckoning. I called Sam, my lawyer friend. I told him everything. The locked doors, the stolen designs, the licensing agreement. He was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. "Frank," he said, "this is worse than you think. This isn't just a family squabble. This is fraud. And we are going to burn them to the ground." I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of focused, almost serene, purpose. While Leo and Chloe were busy planning their big party, ordering champagne and sending out embossed invitations, I was planning a different kind of event. First, Sam drafted the legal documents. A formal cease and desist letter, cold and brutal in its clarity. It detailed the breach of the licensing agreement, the intellectual property theft, and the fraudulent claims Leo had made about being the original designer. It demanded an immediate halt to the production and sale of any furniture based on Helen's designs and a full public retraction. It was a legal declaration of war. Next, I built a weapon they would never see coming. I'm not a computer guy, you know, but I can follow instructions. I bought a book on how to build a website for beginners and spent 3 days hunched over my old laptop. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and elegant, just like Helen's work. I called it the Helen Martin Project. I uploaded the hundreds of scanned images from her sketchbooks. For each design, I included the date she had drawn it and a short note about her inspiration. Then, I created a gallery, a side-by-side comparison. On one side, a high-resolution scan of Helen's original, dated sketch. On the other, a professional photograph from the Leo and Company website of the finished product he was selling for a small fortune. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was exact. It was a digital museum of his lies. The final touch was a short biography I wrote about Helen. I wrote about her quiet passion, her brilliant eye for design, and her dream of one day sharing her work with the world. I didn't mention Leo by name. I didn't have to. The website itself was a silent, devastating indictment of everything he had done. The night of the party arrived. I knew from the society pages that it was the biggest event in the local design community all year. I could picture it perfectly: Chloe in a designer dress, Leo basking in the admiration of the crowd, both of them feeling like they were on top of the world. They were about to learn that the higher you climb, the harder you fall. At exactly 8 p.m., just as I knew Leo would be taking the stage to give his acceptance speech, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I had compiled a list of email addresses, the editor-in-chief of the design magazine, the main investors Leo was courting, and a dozen of the most influential design bloggers and critics who I knew were at that party. I attached a simple 2-page PDF to the email. The first page was a copy of the cease and desist letter from Sam's law firm. The second page was a link to the Helen Martin Project website. The subject line was simple: regarding the authenticity of Leo Martin's designs. I hit send. Then I opened my web browser and with a final, satisfying click, I published the website. I made it live for the entire world to see. For a moment, I just sat there in the quiet of my little apartment. I thought about Helen and I hoped, wherever she was, that she would be proud. The peasant craftsman was about to teach the visionary a lesson in authenticity. The beauty of a well-laid plan is watching it unfold with the precision of a finely tuned machine. I didn't have to be at that party to know what was happening. I could imagine it all. 8:01 p.m. In the sleek, minimalist showroom of Leo and Company, my son is on a small stage, a glass of champagne in his hand. He's in his element, charming the crowd with a rehearsed speech about his creative journey. He talks about authenticity and his deeply personal connection to his work. The crowd of architects, designers, and wealthy patrons is captivated. 8:02 p.m. Across that crowded room, phones begin to vibrate. A quiet buzz at first, then another and another. The editor of the magazine, a woman with a severe haircut and a powerful reputation, glances at her phone. An email from an unknown source. She almost deletes it, but the subject line catches her eye. A few feet away, Mr. Abernathy, the investor who dismissed me as a helper, does the same. Curiosity is a powerful thing. 8:03 p.m. The editor clicks the link. Her eyes widen as the clean, elegant homepage of The Helen Martin Project loads. She sees the side-by-side comparisons. A sketch from 1995 next to a chair that is currently on display 10 feet away from her. The investor sees it too. A design for a coffee table, dated 1998, signed by a woman named Helen Martin, is identical to the one he was just considering commissioning for his penthouse. On stage, Leo is oblivious. He's just getting to the part of his speech about the importance of original vision. 8:05 p.m. A low murmur begins to spread through the showroom. People are looking at their phones, whispering to their neighbors. They're forwarding the link. The name, Helen Martin, is being spoken in hushed tones. The energy in the room has shifted. The fawning admiration has been replaced by a tense, electric curiosity. Leo senses the change. He falters in his speech, losing his place. He sees the editor striding purposefully toward him, her face a mask of cold fury. He sees Mr. Abernathy, his face pale, turn and walk briskly toward the exit without a backward glance. And then I made my entrance. The doors to the showroom slid open, and I walked in. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. I was just there. I was wearing my work clothes, clean, simple denim and a flannel shirt. The clothes of a craftsman. My hands were clean, but you could still see the calluses, the roadmap of a life spent making things. In my arms, I carried one of Helen's original leather-bound sketchbooks. The room fell completely silent. Every eye was on me. Leo and Chloe stood on the stage, frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. I didn't say a word. I walked slowly through the stunned crowd, right up to the centerpiece of the exhibit, a beautiful walnut dining table that Leo was selling for $50,000. I opened the sketchbook to a specific page, the one with Helen's original, detailed drawing of that very table. The drawing was dated, in her elegant script, July 1999. I gently placed the open sketchbook on the surface of the table. The evidence was undeniable. The lie was exposed. The silence was deafening. I looked up and met my son's eyes. In that moment, he wasn't a visionary designer or a successful businessman. He was just a little boy who had been caught stealing from his mother. I turned and walked out of the showroom as quietly as I had entered. I didn't need to see the rest. The chaos, the accusations, the frantic attempts at damage control. My work was done. As the doors slid shut behind me, I could hear the eruption of voices, the sound of a carefully constructed world falling to pieces. Justice, like good furniture, is best served simple, strong, and without unnecessary ornamentation. The aftermath was a quiet affair, at least for me. The design world, however, exploded. The Helen Martin Project went viral. Bloggers and magazines that had been praising Leo just days before were now writing scathing articles about the scandal. Helen was hailed as a lost genius, an unsung hero of modern design. Leo and Chloe became pariahs overnight. The investors pulled out, the magazine issued a formal retraction, and their clients canceled orders in droves. Their business, built on a lie, collapsed in less than a month. They were forced to settle the lawsuit Sam filed. The terms were simple. They had to issue a public apology acknowledging Helen as the sole designer of the entire collection. They had to cease all production and remove every piece from their showroom. and they had to turn over all remaining profits to a new entity I had established, the Helen Martin Foundation for Young Designers. I didn't take a penny for myself. This was never about money. It was about truth. A few weeks later, there was a quiet knock on the door of my apartment. It was Leo. He looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. The arrogant confidence had been replaced by a weary, hollowed-out look in his eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was quiet. I stepped aside. He walked in and looked around the small, simple space. He looked at the old photos of him and me, of the three of us when we were a family. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "I'm so sorry, Dad." He told me everything. How it started small, just borrowing a few of Helen's ideas. But the praise, the success, it was addictive. Chloe pushed him, he said, telling him he deserved the credit, that Helen would have wanted him to be successful, no matter what it took. He had started to believe it himself. He had convinced himself that the ideas were somehow his own. "I lost my way," he said, tears running down his cheeks. "I forgot everything you and Mom taught me. About honesty. About respect." We sat there for a long time, in the quiet of my apartment, and for the first time in years, we talked. Really talked. Not as a businessman and a helper, but as a father and a son. I didn't forgive him, not right away. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. But it was a start. In the end, I reclaimed my workshop. Leo, humbled and broke, asked if he could work with me. Not as a partner, but as an apprentice. To start over. To learn the craft again, the right way this time, with humility and respect. I spend my days now back where I belong, covered in sawdust. Sometimes, Leo is there beside me, and I see glimpses of the little boy I used to know. We don't talk much about the past. We don't need to. We just work. We build things. Simple, honest, beautiful things. The Helen Martin Foundation is thriving, helping young, talented designers who have a real vision of their own get their start. Her legacy is finally being honored the way it was meant to be. I've learned a thing or two in my 68 years. I've learned that a person's character, like a piece of wood, has a grain. You can try to force it, to bend it against its nature, but eventually, it will crack. The most important lesson, though, is this. A legacy isn't about what you build for yourself, the money, the fame, the brand. It's about what you build for others. It's about the truths you pass down, the skills you share, and the love you honor. The strongest foundations aren't made of glass and steel, they're made of integrity. And that's a lesson no amount of money can ever buy.